You jump into a sky you can't see. No moon worth trusting. Flak lighting the black in flashes that blind you worse than the dark already did, and somewhere below is farmland you've never walked and can't identify. The plan said your whole 16-man stick would land together, in one field, 300 yards from the rally point. The plan was wrong before your boots hit the ground. That's the part nobody tells you about a night combat jump. It isn't the jump that kills men. It's the hour after, alone in a hedgerow, not knowing if the shape 40 feet away is one of yours. Somewhere out there in that same darkness is a problem nobody solved with a rifle. If radios are dead and half your unit is scattered across 5 different fields, how do you tell a friend from an enemy before either of you gets a shot off? There was an answer to that, and it wasn't what you'd expect from the best equipped army in the world. But that comes later. First, you have to survive being completely alone. The night of June 6th, 1944, the 101st and 82nd Airborne scattered so badly over Normandy that some units landed 6, 8, even 15 miles from where they were supposed to. Dick Winters, a young officer with Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, jumped that night with a leg bag holding most of his gear, and it tore away in the air before he ever reached the ground. He landed with almost nothing. No rifle worth trusting, just a knife and a farmhouse nearby that might hold Germans, or might hold nobody at all. That's the position you're actually in. Not defeated, just down to less than what you jumped with, and completely on your own. Then comes the hunger, and it isn't the kind a sandwich fixes. You're carrying maybe 2 days of rations, D-bars, and K-rations that taste like compressed chalk, and you eat them cold because a fire is a flare gun pointed at your own position. Winters and the handful of men he gathered that first night didn't eat a real meal for nearly 2 days. Not because there was nothing around. Every field nearby had livestock and untouched orchards. But a field you don't control is a field the enemy might be watching, and hunger, it turns out, is more patient than bullets. You ration what little you have and keep moving, because moving toward the objective is the only thing that turns lost back into mission. Sleep is where it gets strange, because you don't really get any. Not the kind that resets you. You find a ditch or the thick base of a hedgerow and you take turns. One man's eyes open while the other closes his for 20 minutes at a stretch. Real sleep needs trust in the ground around you, and behind enemy lines the ground around you is exactly what you can't trust. Some men that first Normandy night went 30, 40 hours before anything close to real rest, running on adrenaline that keeps a body upright long after it should have collapsed, and paying for it later in shaking hands and decisions made half a second too slow. Here's what's easy to miss if you only picture the fighting. The hardest part wasn't the Germans. It was not knowing where your unit was, or if the farmhouse ahead held friendlies, or a machine gun crew waiting for daylight. Every hedgerow in Normandy looked identical to the last, thick and green and impossible to see through. So moving at night meant navigating a maze that repeated itself for miles, trusting a compass and a handful of landmarks half remembered from a map 3 days old. That disorientation wore men down faster than fear did. You can train a soldier to take fire. It's harder to train him to function for 2 straight days without knowing exactly where he is. Which brings us back to the problem from the start of the night. How do you know friend from enemy when radios are dead and nobody's where they're supposed to be? The answer the Army actually issued to paratroopers before the Normandy drop was a small tin toy that made a clicking sound like a cricket. One click meant, "Who's there?" 2 clicks back meant friend. No answer, and you assumed the worst and acted on it. Some of the best trained soldiers on Earth, reduced in the dark to a dime store noisemaker because it was the one thing simple enough to still work when everything else had failed. That's not a footnote in the story. That was the actual system an entire airborne assault leaned on to keep from shooting each other in a hedgerow at 2 in the morning. By the time Winters found a scattered handful of Easy Company men that morning, roughly a dozen out of the more than 100 who'd jumped with him, they still didn't have most of their equipment and still had no contact with battalion. They moved out toward the objective anyway, because that was the job. A few hours later, those same men took out a fortified German position at Brecourt Manor, an action still taught at West Point as a case study in small unit assault. None of it happens without surviving the night first. The cold, the hunger, the clicks in the dark, the ditch that passed for sleep. That's the trade every paratrooper makes before he ever fires a shot. He gives up the map, the radio, the full ration, and the real rest every other soldier still gets in exchange for landing exactly where the enemy isn't expecting anyone to be at all. It's a trade paid for in the dark, alone, hours before the fighting even starts. So when you picture a combat jump, picture the part that actually decided whether Easy Company had 13 men left to take those guns at Brecourt Manor. Was surviving that first night, alone, hungry, and half blind in the dark, worth what it cost every man who lived through it?